campaign debate in Nevada's 3rd District. Now to that governor's debate in Massachusetts, courtesy of WSBK-TV, Boston.
A Campaign 2018 special. The Massachusetts Governor's Debate starts right now.
Good evening and welcome to the WBZ Massachusetts Gubernatorial Debate here on TV 38. I'm John Keller, political analyst for WBZ, welcoming those of you watching our live stream on CBSBoston.com, our listeners on WBZ News Radio 1030, and viewers across the state and the nation on C-SPAN. Let's meet the candidates for governor of Massachusetts in alphabetical order. They are the incumbent, Republican Charlie Baker, a former health care executive and cabinet official under Governors Weld and Cellucci, seeking his 2nd term in office. And the challenger, Democrat Jay Gonzalez, also a former health care executive who served in the cabinet of Governor Patrick. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
A quick word about our format before we begin. The candidates each have a minute to respond to the same question, and our thanks go out to members of the public for their topic and question suggestions. After that, we move to open periods of crosstalk, rebuttal, and direct questioning of each other. The only rules there: no filibustering, no talking over each other, and of course, total obedience to the moderator. That cycle will continue for the entire hour, and with that said, let's begin our debate, and we'll start with responses in alphabetical order, with Governor Baker answering the first question first. Both of you have expressed concern that the elevation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh might lead to the overturning of the 45-year-old Roe v. Wade Supreme Court ruling that legalized abortion. In July, Massachusetts repealed old anti-abortion statutes that predated Roe, but there are still laws on the books, like mandatory parental consent for minors, that are strongly objected to by abortion rights advocates. So if elected, or in your case, Governor re-elected, what, if any, other steps would you take to protect abortion access? 1 minute, sir.
Well, this is obviously an important issue, and it has a lot to do with why I was concerned about Justice Kavanaugh's nomination in the first place, and I'm especially concerned about his confirmation at this point. I do think the work we've done in Massachusetts on a bipartisan basis to both expand access to women's reproductive rights and to pass state laws that ensure here in the Commonwealth that these issues will not be jeopardized by changes in federal policy, and the passage, as you point out, of the elimination of a number of old laws that were on the books were important first steps. But I also think one of the things we should do is work with our colleagues in other states, Democrats and Republicans, to build a coalition that understands and recognizes the importance of abortion rights and a woman's right to choose. With respect to the issue associated with mandatory parental notification, we do have a policy here in Massachusetts that's a fairly easy one for people under the age of 16 to pursue, and many do, and it works pretty well. I talk to the judges about it quite a bit.
Time. Okay, Mr. Gonzalez.
So I strongly support a woman's right to choose, including, to answer your question, John, eliminating the age for consent. I'm very proud to have the endorsement of NARAL Pro-Choice Massachusetts, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect a woman's right to choose. Governor Baker has endorsed Jeff Deal to replace Elizabeth Warren in the United States Senate. Jeff Deal, who was the co-chair of Donald Trump's campaign right here in Massachusetts and would be a rubber stamp for the Trump agenda. And by backing Jeff Deal, Governor Baker is supporting an anti-choice agenda as well as an anti-LGBTQ, pro-NRA agenda. And I would never support someone like that who could go tip the balance in the United States Senate, someone who would have voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh and might vote to confirm the next Brett Kavanaugh. And I'm curious, Governor, why you have supported Jeff Deal.
Response.
Look, I said months ago, as the governor of the Commonwealth, that I would endorse the ticket, whoever won the primaries. But my positions on these issues are quite clear. I mean, I'm getting sued right now by the NRA. I got a D and an F, respectively, from the NRA and from Goal. And I appreciate the fact that Planned Parenthood, one of the most important organizations with respect to women's reproductive rights in the country, has supported our campaign and many of the issues that we've been involved in. I do believe this is a key issue for us and for our country, and I do believe that it's going to be important for the next governor to find ways to build bipartisan relationships, to work this one and work it hard, and I can do that.
Rebuttal.
To be clear, Planned Parenthood hasn't endorsed your campaign or our campaign.
Correct, yeah.
And I want to be really clear about something, because this is a very important point. Governor Baker just said his loyalty is to the Republican ticket. Even if that means sending someone to the United States Senate who would do everything in his power to undercut a woman's right to choose. I would never do that. And I want to be clear. I will be a governor that stands up for women's rights and LGBTQ rights and common sense gun laws, not just some of the time, but all of the time. Not just reluctantly, but wholeheartedly. And for me, it won't be a matter of political calculation. These positions are based on my core values.
Go ahead, sir, if you like.
Look, my view on gun issues is quite clear, and I'm enormously proud of the work we've done, again, on a bipartisan basis, working with our colleagues in the legislature to both ban bump stocks. We were the first state in the country to do that after the terrible tragedy in Las Vegas, and we were one of the first states to pass an extreme risk protective order legislation as well. And I'll tell you something, I just happened to be going to Nevada to speak at a conference right after that terrible tragedy at the Country Fest concert out there. And Governor Sandoval and I toured the memorial, the makeshift memorial that had been developed out there. And I came back and I said to the folks in the legislature, we got to do something about bump stocks, and we did it. And shortly after Parkland, we said we have to do something about ERPO, and we did that as well. Massachusetts has among the very best gun laws in the country. I support them and I'm proud of them. And I constantly refer to them when I talk to my colleagues in other states and at the federal level.
Go ahead, then I want to move on.
But you're wanting to send someone to the United States Senate who would support Donald Trump's pro-NRA agenda. And there is senseless gun violence happening across this country. I was mortified to find out that the assault weapon used in Parkland was made right here in Massachusetts. And I immediately proposed banning the manufacture of assault weapons in Massachusetts. And I don't know if you've taken a position on that, Governor, but I think we need to do everything we possibly can to protect students and people across this state from senseless gun violence, and sending Jeff Deal to the United States Senate to support Donald Trump's pro-NRA agenda is not the way to do it.
He addressed you directly, and I want to give you an opportunity if you want.
My views on Donald Trump are quite well known. I didn't vote for him, and I worked with other governors and senators, Republicans and Democrats, to fight back against his cuts to the Affordable Care Act, for which we were successful. I worked hard with the Attorney General here in Massachusetts and others to fight back against the travel ban. And I've made quite clear my view on what I think about many of his positions and many of his policies. And he's not running. I'm running for governor, not Jeff Deal.
All right, let's move on. You can always return to, at later points in the debate, to issues that were raised earlier. I will definitely allow that. So for this question, Mr. Gonzalez, you'll go first. A viewer named Anna Maria writes, in the wake of the Merrimack Valley gas explosions, quote, I am concerned about using gas as an energy source, both from a safety and long-term climate perspective. How big a role do you think natural gas should play in our energy future? 1 minute, sir.
I strongly oppose expanding natural gas pipeline infrastructure in this state, and this is a big difference between myself and Governor Baker. We need to move aggressively, much more aggressively, to a true clean energy economy. And it's not just because of the greenhouse gas emission impact of natural gas, but as your questioner noted, we just were reminded this is very dangerous. So I support no more gas pipelines in this state, accelerating our transition to renewable energy sources. I think we should be the first state in the nation to adopt carbon pricing. I am going to be a bold leader on this issue, which we just were reminded by the UN panel's report that just came out a couple of weeks ago. This is an even bigger threat to our planet and a much more urgent issue than we even thought before. And this is one example among many where the status quo approach is not going to be good enough, and we need bold leadership. I'm going to aim high on this issue and make sure that we are a leader in taking on climate change.
Thank you, Governor Baker.
Well, I do believe we are a leader in taking on climate change. And I'd start with the fact that, again, we worked with our colleagues in the legislature on a bipartisan basis to pass one of the most significant pieces of legislation in state history with respect to getting away from fossil fuels. And that was the legislation that made it possible for us to access significant amounts of hydropower, hydroelectric power from Canada, and the largest offshore wind procurement in U.S. history. And the best part about it, John, is when we did the work, we put those out to bid, they came back at price points that shocked everyone, meaning that they were affordable, and they sent a big signal to the world markets that this stuff was for real. And it's been fascinating to me watch every state down the East Coast suddenly decide they want to get into the offshore wind business because of the work that we did here in Massachusetts. And I take tremendous pride in that. In addition to that, we're one of the only states that's invested in storage. Storage is ultimately how you really bring deep water wind, onshore wind, and solar to the fore, because it makes it possible to firm up those assets so that they can be used 24/7. Okay. I think in many ways, we are moving in the right direction, and we are moving aggressively. We're leading the country in a number of these areas.
Rebuttal.
Not nearly aggressively enough. We've got 800 megawatts of offshore wind being developed in the near future. 800 more to come. We need to be doing it much quicker than we currently are. We should mandate the development of the additional 1,600 megawatts. Governor Baker has put various constraints on solar development. We've actually lost jobs in the solar industry as a result of it. I would lift those constraints. We need to be much bolder about this. I want to come back to the questioner's point about natural gas. We were just reminded, because of this tragedy in the Merrimack Valley, somebody lost his life. Many people were injured. There are thousands of people whose lives have been disrupted by this. Governor Baker and I have a different philosophy, I think, about the role of government, and this is an area where it's a really important reminder. Government is there to protect us, and the state agency that is supposed to protect us from the gas companies and keeping us safe, the federal government told the Baker administration weeks before the Merrimack Valley incident that they did not have enough inspectors. I would hire multiple times the inspectors and make sure we are being proactive in overseeing the gas companies.
Equal time.
Well, first of all, safety is everybody's #1 priority on this, and it's a joint relationship between the state and the federal government that manages our natural gas infrastructure. And that federal government that came and reviewed the Massachusetts Pipeline Safety Program gave us 50 points out of 50 points, a perfect score. And in addition to that, in 2017, DPU did 1,100 investigations, which was far more than they've done in any of the previous 5 or 6 years. Do we need to do more on this? Yes, and that's one of the reasons why after the Lawrence, North Andover, and Andover incident, as an abundance of caution, the DPU is putting out a bid to bring in a third party to do a top-to-bottom review of the entire natural gas infrastructure in Massachusetts and the policies and procedures that are in place to protect it. But this is obviously something we all need to take seriously, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time up there ever since that incident and that disaster, working with families, with shelters, with the mayors, with local officials and others to do everything we possibly can to make sure people get their heat and hot water back safely.
Briefly, go ahead.
It's not enough. And, the old Republican playbook of smaller government has shown us what the consequences of that are. The federal government in this report said there weren't enough inspectors, and the regulatory regime, the oversight regime, relied on the gas companies that are filling Governor Baker's campaign coffers to basically oversee themselves. And that is not the way this should work. I'm going to hire multiple times the inspectors to make sure government, which is the one institution whose only interest is to protect us, is overseeing the gas companies in the work they're doing on our gas pipeline infrastructure.
Go ahead.
No, I would just say that, as I said before, in the past 3 years, we've done more inspections than any 3-year period of time. And we are going to do a full-blown review, independent analysis of both the infrastructure we have now and the work that's being done on them to make sure that if there are any gaps in our work, that we fill those gaps.
I want to follow up with a question. You'll go first here, Governor, that seems relevant to this. More than 1,000 National Grid workers are in a lockout situation. The union argues that that lockout should end so those workers can help with Merrimack Valley recovery. Others argue that's not something that the public officials should get involved in. It's a private sector matter. My question is, when, if ever, is it appropriate for a governor to intervene in a private sector labor dispute, and how would you handle that? 1 minute, sir.
Well, we spent a fair amount of time over the course of the past 4 or 5 weeks with the steelworkers, with National Grid, and we have put them in the same room to see if we can mediate their differences and get them to hammer out an agreement. I'd love to be able to say we've been successful in doing that. We haven't been able to get them to agree yet. I will say this. We've put additional constraints on National Grid's ability to do work here in the Commonwealth of Mass, based in large part on the number of people they have available to do the work. And I do believe that sort of thing is, if you're thinking safety is your primary issue, which I believe it is, I do believe the most important thing we can do is make sure the grid is only doing emergency work and other mandated statutory work due to the fact that they don't have those folks working the job.
Mr. Gonzalez, one minute.
This is definitely a case where the governor should have stepped in much earlier. And a lot of these National Grid steelworkers were out in front of your studio today cheering me on as I came in, because I've stood with them. I went with them to the Department of Public Utilities to find out, this was before the Merrimack Valley incident, the temporary workers had been doing work that resulted in a lot of safety issues, about 100 reports filed with the Department of Public Utilities, including about 10 incidents of overpressurization, the same issue that we saw in the Merrimack Valley. And the DPU was non-responsive multiple times. It's only after this incident that they cared about this. But this is a situation where the National Grid workers, I think, have been treated reprehensibly by the company, who have locked them out, stopped paying them, stopped their health insurance coverage, and they have all these temporary workers on the job who are not being as safe as the National Grid workers would be.
Rebuttal?
Look, it's not true that that we didn't meet with them and discuss these issues with them. We were the ones who met with them and sent them down to the DPU and eventually issued an order that was specific to the issues and concerns that have been raised by the steelworkers. And we'll continue to pursue those issues as they come available. And we've made quite clear to them that our doors are open to meet with them whenever they want to raise issues, especially if they relate to safety.
Go ahead.
John,
Go right ahead.
I am running for governor to fight for all the little guys out there, all the workers like the National Grid workers who are getting squeezed. We need unions now more than ever, because most working families in this state are being left behind. And the whole reason I'm running for governor is to make a meaningful difference in their lives, to take on the big issues that are holding them back. And this is a situation where I've joined the National Grid workers at many rallies. I've joined other union members at other rallies, because they're being treated in a way that they aren't benefiting from this economic recovery in the same way that the people at the top are, and I am in this to fight for them.
A final word, if you like, then I'm going to move on.
I think it's really important that those guys and gals get back to work, and I think one of the ways we get them back to work is by demonstrating to National Grid that they're not going to be able to do any more work outside their statutory obligations until they put them back to work.
Yeah. And equal time, briefly.
I don't have anything else on it.
Okay. All right. Let's move on then. And you'll start here, Mr. Gonzalez. According to research by the transportation analytics company INRIX, Boston drivers spend a higher percentage of their time stuck in congestion than in any other U.S. city, even worse than New York and L.A. Do we need to spend more money to fix that problem? And if we do, how should it be spent, and where will that money come from? 1 minute, sir.
We absolutely need to. And we have one of the worst transportation systems in the country. People sitting in traffic longer than pretty much anywhere else in the country. A transit system, the MBTA, and other transit systems where people are paying higher fares for disabled trains and reduced bus service. People cannot depend on our transportation system to get to work on time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm being honest about the fact that we do need to raise taxes to invest more. I have a $3 billion plan to do so. We're going to raise $3 billion each year to invest in transportation and education so that we get our transportation system to a place where people can depend on it to get to work on time. I'm going to ask the wealthy to pay their fair share. I'm not going to ask lower middle income people to pay more in taxes, but we're going to raise $3 billion, and we are being honest about the fact we need to do so. I am not trying to become governor to manage the status quo. The status quo is not working for working families across this state, and our transportation system is the thing I hear the most about everywhere I go. I will provide the bold leadership we need to fix it.
Let's talk about the status quo transportation system that we inherited. In the last several years before we took office, the T didn't spend $1.5 billion in capital funds that were available to it. Its repair backlog doubled. Over and over and over again, the T simply wasn't getting the job done for anybody, and it was ignored by one administration after another. We're the first administration that created a fiscal management control board and went hard at making significant investments in the system that moves 1 million people around this Commonwealth every day. And we spent $1.9 billion over the past 3 years on what I call the current operation of the T, a place that's been ignored by administration after administration. And it's not sexy stuff. It's signals and switches and third rail and tracks and the stuff that really makes a difference with respect to the system's ability to perform. And yes, there's more to do. But the bottom line is if you don't start by fixing the stuff that really matters around the system's current performance, you're never going to get there.
Just to clarify, do you think we need more money?
Our plan is to spend $8 billion over the next 5 years on the MBTA, which will be $5 billion more than was spent in the 5 years before we took office. That's a lot of money. But we're going to spend it on the stuff that's actually going to improve the quality of the service and the capacity of the system for the people who ride it.
Go ahead.
Your plan is the T is going to be in a state of good repair in 15 years, and you haven't said how you're going to pay for all of that. And that is totally unacceptable. We need to be much more ambitious. We need to have more of a sense of urgency around this. You need to get out and talk to commuters. It is the issue I hear about more than anything else. I have ridden the T with many different people, and they are done with this system that they can't depend on. People like Libby, who literally stood on the platform while the countdown clock said 1 minute for 20 minutes in the freezing cold before she called an Uber. I was on a commuter rail recently where water was dripping down from the ceiling and people couldn't sit in the seats and they're crammed standing in the aisles. It's totally unacceptable. Governor, I think riding with riders, and I know many people have asked you to and you've refused to, you'd learn a lot. I think it'd show respect to people about your wanting to understand their experience. And with the lack of urgency and the fact the system hasn't been fixed, I'm surprised that commuters haven't revolted and started a petition to change the name of these T-passes from Charlie Card to Where's Charlie Card?
Okay, response?
Look, the job of the governor is to actually make the T work, and that's been what we've been focused on for the past 3 years. The T was broken when we took office, and it was broken from years and years of neglect. And as a result, we have made many of the investments that are required to get it moving in a different direction. On the commuter rail, that's been really boring stuff. 200,000 railroad ties. But those 200,000 railroad ties getting replaced made it possible to get all the speed limits raised to a normal rate during the summer and during the winter so that it could actually deliver people on time to the locations it was supposed to get to. We're spending $1 billion on the core infrastructure associated with the Orange Line and the Red Line, so that when those new Orange Line and Red Line cars show up, they'll actually be able to travel on a system that works and is reliable and dependable. And we rescued the Green Line Extension project into Somerville, which was basically dead when we took office, because we believed that was a project worth saving, and we managed to get $1 billion out of the federal government to pay for it.
Go ahead.
The money that exists now, the new train cars, are because of decisions the Deval-Patrick administration put in place, and we need to do much more. We need significant additional revenue to get the system to where it needs to be as quickly as possible. And I want people to know that I am in this to fix this system for you, so that you can depend on it, so that it improves your quality of life, so that businesses want to continue to invest here because their workforce can get to work on time. And we are going to raise taxes on the wealthy. I have a specific plan to do so. The governor has no plan to do so. He did not answer your question about whether he's going to raise more taxes, but the status quo is not good enough. The one other thing I'm going to do is fire Keolis, the private operator of the commuter rail system. They've done a terrible job. I'll be the first governor to bring it in-house and manage it directly.
Go ahead.
One of his former cabinet colleagues called firing Keolis a political talking point. And in fact, during his time in state government, the T did a study on whether or not they should bring it in publicly and concluded it would be too expensive to do it and it would be less reliable and less flexible with respect to its ability to deliver service. That's not a real answer. I'd also like to point out that his $3 billion wouldn't actually start until his second term, because $2 billion of that is associated with a constitutional amendment that he has to get through 2 sets of the legislatures before it actually happens. And the other $1 billion comes from a plan that was actually originally proposed by President Trump and by the Republican Congress, which is to tax the endowments of colleges and universities here in Massachusetts.
We have to take a break, but this is an important issue. I want to give you each one more bite at the apple. Go ahead. Go ahead
right now.
Yeah.
That's right. I do have a plan to tax the wealthy, to tax millionaires. It would raise $2 billion a year, and the earliest we can do that is 4 years from now, and it's not soon enough, which is why I also have a plan to raise $1 billion from the wealthy universities in this state, which I think is fair. They can afford it. They can continue to do everything they do today, and it will make a meaningful difference for the most important asset in our economy, which is our people, who right now can't depend on our transportation system and where our education system is failing too many of our young people.
Equal time.
Look, we have a plan to spend $8 billion over the next 5 years on the stuff on the T that's going to improve the bus system, the commuter rail, and the rapid transit system. And that's where our money should be spent. The plan's organized, the plan's funded. It's not made up of funny money, and it's not made up of money that starts 3 or 4 years or 5 years or 6 years from now. It's available, it's in the plan, it's going to get spent, and it will deliver the kind of reliable 21st century transportation system that the people of Massachusetts deserve.
All right, gentlemen, on that note, let's take that short break, and we will turn to a fresh topic when the WBZ gubernatorial debate continues in a moment. Please stay with us.
You're watching political debate coverage on C-SPAN 2. The C-SPAN network's your primary source for campaign 2018. While they take a break in this debate, here are some of the campaign ads currently airing in the Massachusetts governor's race.
It began with a promise.
Success is measured by what we accomplish together.
Governor Charlie Baker's bipartisan leadership has taken Massachusetts to new heights.
Last year, Massachusetts had the highest graduation rate and the lowest dropout rate. We're creating more jobs than ever before, and we continue to be a state that leads because we have great people.
Integrity, leadership, results. Charlie Baker.
This is how government should work.
You know what I love about Massachusetts? That we've always been a leader. We've always set our sights high and believed we can do better. I'm Jay Gonzalez, and I'm running for governor because I want us to lead again. I care about people, and I want to make a difference. I'll be offering an ambitious agenda to move us forward. And I have the leadership experience in the public and private sectors to make it happen.
We'll return to live coverage of the Massachusetts governor's debate in just a moment, and we'll have more live debate coverage tomorrow night, beginning with a U.S. House debate in North Carolina's 9th District between Democrat Dan McCready and Republican Mark Harris. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern. And at 8, candidates in New Jersey's 11th Congressional District vying to fill the seat of retiring Republican Rodney Frelinghuysen. Both debates are over on C-SPAN and at cspan.org. And momentarily, we'll take you back to Boston for the rest of tonight's debate between Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker and his challenger, Jay Gonzalez. You're watching live coverage on C-SPAN 2, the C-SPAN network's your primary source for campaign 2018.
Welcome back to the WBZ gubernatorial debate here on TV 38. And before our break, Mr. Gonzalez, you raised an issue that I want to follow up on. Governor Baker, you'll start in this round. As you know, Mr. Gonzalez has proposed raising funds to spend on transit and other priorities by imposing a 1.6% tax on private nonprofit schools with endowments in excess of $1 billion. He claims more than half of the proceeds would come from Harvard University, your alma mater, I believe, Governor, which has an endowment of well over $40 billion. You've called this a bad idea. Why? 1 minute, please.
Well, first of all, the colleges and universities here in the Commonwealth of Mass are a major economic engine, a significant employer, and they do wonderful things to promote discovery, research, and learning. But most importantly, their endowments fund, among other things, scholarships and financial aid for low-income and middle-income students. And why we would take $565 million away from Harvard, $200 million away from MIT, and very significant numbers away from other colleges and universities here in Massachusetts that use that money to fund the very kids we're supposed to be interested in seeing get an education, just doesn't make any sense to me. On top of that, it was an idea that was originally proposed by the Trump administration and the Republican Congress, and I opposed it at the time, to basically punish colleges and universities. I don't think we should be punishing colleges and universities. I think we should be investing in them.
Mr. Gonzalez, 1 minute.
It wasn't originally proposed by Trump. It's been pending in legislation on Beacon Hill for a while. But here's why it makes sense. Because the status quo for our education system is not good enough. And it isn't good enough for our transportation system. I am going to aim high. I'm going to take on these big challenges. I want every child and family in this state to have access to high-quality, affordable child care and preschool. I want a young person in Brockton to have the same educational opportunity as a young person in Brookline. I want our public universities and community colleges to be affordable and debt-free for any resident who wants to go without being burdened by student loans. And yes, I want to fix our transportation system so that it actually works for people. And we need to invest more to do that. And this proposal is fair. It would raise $1 billion, which would get us started in a meaningful way on these agenda items. And these universities, I agree, they are important to our economy. But based on the average annual rate of growth of these endowments over the last 15 years, they can afford this tax, do everything they do today, and their endowments will still grow. I believe the more important asset to our economy is our people, and that's who I'm going to fight for.
Rebuttal.
Well, the first thing is, if you think about what my opponent just laid out, it adds up to at least $4 or $5 billion annually all by itself. So his proposal, as misguided as it is, doesn't come close to covering what he's talking about actually paying for. So let's get into the discussion about what he chose to make as decisions when he actually had his hand on the tiller when he worked in state government. Under his management as Secretary of Administration and Finance, he cut early childhood education by $85 million, at the same point in time that state spending grew by $6.5 billion. That's the decision he made when he actually had to make a choice. We've increased spending on early childhood education over the past 4 years by over $100 million. That's the choice we made.
Go ahead.
There's a lot of fuzzy math there, but I'm telling people what I'm going to do as governor, not what I did when I worked for Governor Patrick. And what I'm going to do as governor is actually try to make progress on these issues that are holding people back. Affordable child care and preschool is huge. And what Governor Baker's doing isn't nearly enough to make a difference for people, to make it affordable for everyone, and to provide the high-quality services that will make a meaningful difference in kids' lives. The evidence is clear on this. It is game-changing for young kids, and it allows their parents to go to work. I think this is the thing we can do that can have the biggest return on investment for kids and families in this state. And yes, I will ask the wealthy to pay more in taxes so that we can do it, because I don't think where we are right now is good enough.
Rebuttal.
Look, we invested over $100 million in new money in this because we believe it makes a big difference too. But we actually made that decision to invest $100 million. When he was in a position to make a decision about whether to invest in this or not, he cut it by $85 million. Now, he can talk all he wants about the fact that he's got $1 billion to spend. He just gave you $4 or $5 billion worth of items he wanted to spend it on. He's not going to be able to spend it on all of them. And that means he'll go back to doing the same thing that he did before, which is not delivering on a commitment, not delivering on a promise, and overselling what's possible here.
Go ahead briefly.
It's not true. And back then, I was managing a budget during the Great Recession, the worst fiscal crisis the state had faced in decades. I am saying I'm going to raise taxes on the wealthy by $1 billion in my first year and $2 billion more in my last year so that we can make these investments. And it is a lot more, and we will make a lot more progress than Governor Baker, who refused. It's the same old Republican playbook, no new taxes, and we know what we get for that, working families being left behind.
Well, go ahead if you want.
He already spent the $1 billion or the $2 billion or the $3 billion or whatever it was on our transportation conversation. Now he's spending it on our education conversation, even though he's put more money on the table than what's actually been proposed. In addition to that, we did spend $100 million more on early childhood ed because we believe in it. We also increased total state and local spending on K-12 education by $900 million, $500 million from the Commonwealth, $400 million at the local level. We have the highest graduation rate we've ever had, the lowest dropout rate we've ever had. We believe in investing in education, and when we've had the opportunity to prove it, we put our money where our mouth was.
Equal time, then I'm going to move on.
John, it's small ball status quo stuff. It's inflationary increases. It's not what we need. The Baker administration's about to get sued by school districts across this state because they're underfunded and there are huge disparities in our public school system. I will not accept that as governor. I want us to aim high and make a difference. The most important thing we do collectively through government is ensure that every single child has access to a great public education. And I am running to make sure we deliver on that obligation.
Well, this is...
Let's talk about the status quo.
Go ahead.
If I was a status quo governor, there'd still be thousands of homeless families living in hotels and motels in Massachusetts. There aren't. If I was a status quo governor, we wouldn't have a huge offshore wind and hydro program going on to replace a third of our fossil fuels with clean, renewable energy. If I was a status quo governor, Bridgewater State Hospital would still be a stain on the Commonwealth's reputation instead of the hospital that was supposed to be. You talk to families there, it's like night and day with respect to what that place was like once upon a time. If I was a status quo governor, the Health Connector, which crashed during the previous administration and left hundreds of thousands of people struggling to figure out if they actually had health insurance or not, wouldn't be working, which it is, and is now serving 275,000 people here in the Massachusetts. We've done a lot of really important and good things, and I simply do not buy for a minute this notion that we've been a status quo administration.
All right, go ahead and have a response, and then I do want to move on.
It's not nearly enough. That's not an ambitious agenda. There's so much more we need to do to make a difference for working families in this state. That's who I'm going to fight for. I'm going to provide bold leadership on climate change. You were forced by a court to make progress. You got a C grade from climate organizations who think you're not doing enough, and you're not. So I am going to provide the bold leadership we need. We're going to aim high. One of the things I love about this state is we have always been a leader. We've always believed we can overcome any challenge if we put our mind to it and work for it. And that's the type of governor I'm going to be.
Let's come back to one more issue on this, John.
Go ahead.
When he had his tiller on the state budget, he cut the Department of Children and Families. Now that's about as little guy as you can get. You're talking about the most at-risk families here in the Commonwealth of Mass. He cut their budget by over $100 million. Again, when state spending went up by $6.5 billion. So this had nothing to do with the recession. We've increased spending on DCF by $180 million because we believe we should be investing in the little guys and the little gals and the moms and dads that are associated with that agency. We've hired hundreds of social workers, tons of clinical support. Caseloads are as low as they've ever been. When we took office, 40% of the social workers at DCF were licensed. Now it's 99.6%, and we've hired literally hundreds of administrative staff to support their work. That's what I talk about when I talk about helping and delivering in a real way to people in Massachusetts who really need the government to perform.
Equal time. Then I will move on. Go ahead.
It's not enough. I'm telling people what I'm going to do as governor, and we're going to aim high. We're going to take on these big challenges that are going to make a difference in people's lives. I'm being honest about the fact we're going to ask the wealthy to pay more in taxes so that we can do it. And it's a very clear choice people are going to have in this election, as we're hearing. You know, for Governor Baker, his ambition is to improve management of some areas. And to me, that's not good enough. We deserve more from our governor, particularly now when we've got a federal government that has taken us backwards in so many areas. It's more important than ever that we've got real leadership here.
All right, let's move on to another question that's actually related here. You've been talking about taxes and working families. Edward, an unemployed older worker, writes to us, quote, "My immediate need is property tax reduction. I'm paying 28% of my income to City Hall. What will your administration do to give me some relief?" End quote. Mr. Gonzalez, 1 minute.
Well, part of the reason there's so much pressure on property taxes is because the state is falling down on its constitutional obligation to adequately fund public schools. So I have a plan, unlike Governor Baker, to raise $3 billion in taxes on the wealthy, to invest in education and transportation. And we're going to increase the pie in terms of the state's support for public school districts across this state. We're going to reform the formula that hasn't been reformed for 25 years to make sure that we're properly accounting for the costs that school districts have, and that will relieve pressure on property taxes at the local level. Governor Baker has no plan to invest more in our public school system. He's proud of the fact that he's managed to provide inflationary increases in good economic times, and that is not good enough.
Governor Baker, 1 minute.
Look, first of all, Edward, what I would say is that we have supported in the past and have continued to support and advocate for giving people property tax relief who are over the age of 65. And many local communities have chosen to do that. We think pursuing that on a statewide basis would be a good idea as well. And he's right to be concerned about that. The second thing I would say is you can't fund local aid, you can't fund K-12 education on empty promises. And what we're talking about here are empty promises from my opponent. The amount of money he wants to spend and the amount of money he's willing to acknowledge that he's going to raise is not even close to what he would need to get there. He'd need to be raising, instead of $3 billion over 4 or 5 years, he'd need to be raising $30 or $40 billion to actually pay for all the stuff that's on his agenda in transportation and education. And the final thing I'll say is every year we've delivered on our commitments to cities and towns. And you know what we didn't do when times got tough and we had to figure out how to solve the budget at the end of the session because tax revenue came in below expectations? We didn't go back and cut local aid to cities and towns. They did.
Rebuttal.
Again, it's fuzzy math, Governor, and your plan is zero additional investment. So whether you think $3 billion additional tax revenue from the wealthy each year is enough or not, it's $3 billion more than you're promising. And I will get this done. I've been in a leadership position in state government before. I was often Governor Patrick's point person for negotiating a lot of the big things we got through the legislature and working with other stakeholders. And I am not trying to become governor to manage the status quo. We have to make a difference on these big issues that are affecting people's lives in a very real way. And I believe in our potential to do so. And I want us to be who we are. And I'm going to be a governor that aims high and takes on these big challenges and is honest with people about what we need to do to get there.
Rebuttal.
Look, we have 22 mayors, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, mostly Democrats and independents, who've endorsed our campaign, and many, many other local officials, city councilors, school committee members, boards of selectmen. And they're all endorsing our campaign because they believe we've been incredibly strong in developing positive working relationships with our colleagues in local government and working with them on the issues they care about so that they can move their communities forward. I'm a former local official myself. Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito is a former local official. We have former local officials all over our leadership team, and that's not an accident. We wanted people in our administration who understood how to walk the talk with local officials and help them do the things that were going to move their communities forward.
Go ahead.
I also have good relationships with lots of local officials who I worked with when I was in the Patrick administration. Mayor Walsh and many other mayors have endorsed my campaign, and I'm proud of their support. But I am focused on the support of regular people in this state. I'm fighting for all the little guys out there who need a governor who's fighting for them. And we are engaging with people all across this state. We've got a lot of enthusiasm for the fact we're being honest about the fact we're going to ask the wealthy to pay more to make a real difference in people's lives.
Well, look, can I just say one more thing about this?
Go ahead.
You know, there's rhetoric and there's reality. On the reality, he cut DCF by $100 million. We invested $150 in DCF. In the rhetoric, he didn't do anything to help those homeless families in hotels and motels. We did. He cut early childhood ed by $85 million. We increased spending on it by over $100 million. And the final thing I'll point out, they had plenty of time. They had years and years to actually do something about raising the earned income tax credit, which is a major way to put more money into the pockets of 400,000 working families, most of which are headed by women here in the Commonwealth of Mass. We didn't do it once, we did it twice, and we basically doubled the size of the earned income tax credit to those families in Massachusetts. Those are the sorts of things we believe in. Those are the commitments we've made. Those are what we've done. And at the end of the day, voters need to measure us on what we've actually done.
Equal time.
I'm very proud of my record when I worked in the Patrick administration, but I am running to be governor now and deliver on an ambitious agenda that I want to deliver on as governor. And it is very different from what we're getting from our current governor. I mean, the laundry list of accomplishments, while there's some good things there, it's small ball stuff. There are working families across this state who are being left behind, and they need a governor who's going to take on these big challenges. Our education system, our transportation system is one of the worst in the country. And people, it is the thing I hear the most about everywhere I go. And you've been governor for 4 years now, Governor, and they do not feel a difference. In fact, it feels worse. And that's unacceptable to me, and I'm not I'm not running for this to just maintain the status quo. We're going to aim high and take on these big issues and fix them.
That warrants a response.
Look, we inherited a public transportation system that everybody would agree was a mess. And we've done a tremendous amount of work to right the ship there. And as I said, for the first time ever, we've actually been spending serious money on the current system so that the current system can get better and perform. About a third of the bus fleet is now new. There were 10,000 additional scheduled trips on the commuter rail. $1 billion into the tracks and the infrastructure to ensure that when those orange and red line cars show up, which I've given the Patrick administration credit for many times, they actually get where they're supposed to go and the time they're supposed to get there. But to not recognize or understand how important it is to invest in the core system of the MBTA, the one that moves 1 million people a day, that's where the action is going to be and should be for the next couple of years.
I have to take our final break, but you take a few seconds to respond.
I agree it's important. It needs to be a higher priority. We need to be dealing with it with a much greater sense of urgency. And there isn't a rational person who understands the T's budget who would say we don't need more tax revenue to invest to get it to where it needs to be as quickly as possible. And trust me, the people feel it. People feel it. I hear it every day. I see it when I'm out on the riding the T with them. And I am going to tackle this and take this on and fix it for the people of Massachusetts.
All right, gentlemen, we'll take our final break. When we return, we'll shift our focus to crime and punishment. So please stay with us as the WBZ gubernatorial debate continues.
You're watching political debate coverage on C-SPAN 2. The C-SPAN network's your primary source for campaign 2018. While they take a break in this debate, here are some of the campaign ads currently airing in the Massachusetts governor race.
The opioid crisis threatens our families. But today we're fighting back, and Governor Charlie Baker is leading the way, passing landmark legislation to combat addiction, expand treatment, and reduce opioid prescriptions, leading to more lives saved. The first decrease in opioid deaths in 7 years. There's more to be done, but under Charlie Baker, Massachusetts is on the road to recovery. Charlie Baker and Karen Polito. Integrity, leadership, results.
I loved soccer as a kid. It was the thing I was most invested in by far. I played all the time. I loved the team aspect of it. It's one of the neat things about any sports team you're on is you really learn camaraderie, you learn how to work together. It makes it a much more rewarding experience when you're successful.
I'm Jay Gonzalez, a Democrat running for governor of Massachusetts, and I hope to earn your vote on September 4th.
And with the midterm elections less than 30 days away, C-SPAN is your primary source for campaign 2018. More debate coverage on Thursday with the race in Iowa's 3rd congressional district, where incumbent Representative David Young is facing a challenge from Democrat Cindy Axne. Then on Friday, New Mexico's Senator Martin Heinrich debates Republican Mick Rich and third-party candidate Gary Johnson. That's live at 9 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN. This weekend, C-SPAN is live from Wausau, Wisconsin, Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern for the second debate between Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin and Republican Leah Vukmir. And on Sunday, the debate in Ohio between Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown and Republican Representative Jim Renacci. Again, live on C-SPAN starting at 6 p.m. Eastern. Now we'll take you back to the Massachusetts governor's debate.
Welcome back to the WBZ gubernatorial debate here on TV 38. And Governor Baker, this question will go to you first. In an interview this summer, Senator Elizabeth Warren offered what she called a, quote, hard truth about our criminal justice system. It's racist all the way, front to back. Our prison system is something that America should be ashamed of. What we do to other human beings is fundamentally wrong, end quote. Do you agree or disagree? 1 minute, sir.
I don't think our system is racist from front to back, no. Do I think there are issues associated with our criminal justice system that need to be fixed? My answer to that is yes. And that's one of the reasons why we spent so much time working with our colleagues in the legislature on a major criminal justice reform bill. And the 3 big emphasis in that bill were, number 1, to do a better job of helping people come back into productive society after they serve their term, in terms of both programming and also a runway and series of supports as they come out. The second thing was to basically create diversions to prisons, especially for people who are dealing with things like addiction, which I do believe we've made a bunch of progress on, but we have more room to go. And the third issue was to make sure that we were doing the sorts of things we should be doing as a Commonwealth, to not punish people who just don't have any money by holding them in prison simply because they can't pay their bail. And I think those are all good things, and I'm glad we did them.
Mr. Gonzalez, 1 minute.
I think our criminal justice system is the biggest civil rights issue of our time. There are huge racial disparities in arrest rates and incarceration rates, and we need to take this on. I've got a very progressive agenda. The legislature, thankfully, took the lead on this and passed a bill that takes a number of great steps in the right direction. I think we can go further in some areas. I support eliminating all mandatory minimum sentences except for murder. I think we need to make sure that we are really investing in the diversionary programs to make sure we are addressing the underlying causes of crime, like mental illness and addiction. I think we should eliminate cash bail and reform our system of fees and fines even further to make sure we aren't jailing people just because they're poor, which is happening. We have a much higher incarceration rate than most other countries in the world. We're jailing way too many people for way too long. We're not getting the outcomes we need. We can make communities safer, and I'm going to provide the bold leadership to make sure we get there.
Rebuttal.
Well, first of all, I agree with several things that my opponent said on that one. I would say two things. Part of the reason we took on the Bridgewater State Hospital issue was because of the horrible tragedies that have taken place there over the course of literally 30 years. And that was a tough problem to solve, but we solved it. And I think in many ways, when many people think about the history of incarceration here in Massachusetts, Bridgewater is usually the thing that comes right to the top of the pile. I'll give you another example. For years here in Massachusetts, 30 years, if you were a woman who was civilly committed due to a problem with respect to addiction, you got sent to Framingham State Prison with no treatment. We changed that. Again, working with the legislature on a bipartisan basis, we got legislation passed that created treatment capacity at Taunton State Hospital. So if you're a woman and you get committed due to a substance use disorder issue, you'll now actually receive, and they now receive treatment at Taunton State Hospital. I think in many ways, we have a long way to go on this issue, but I do believe here in Massachusetts we're making progress. And the final thing I'll say, because I think it's important for your audience to know, Massachusetts is tied, I think, with Vermont for having the lowest incarceration rate in the country. And when I say lower, I mean it's literally like hugely lower than it is in many other parts. And I think we've done many things right. We have a long way to go, but we've done a lot of things well.
Rebuttal.
It's still way too high, and the governor is still sending people who are addicted and haven't committed a crime to a Department of Corrections facility in Plymouth, where they aren't getting the treatment they need, and I would end that. One other point that's related to our criminal justice system, which is our state police. Their corruption is rampant at the state police. There have been 8 people indicted, 3 people who've pled guilty for crimes committed on Governor Baker's watch. 19 months ago, the first incident of abuse was reported. It took the governor 12 months to propose a series of reforms. It's 6 months since then, and a number of those reforms haven't been implemented. He needs to take charge of this. And it's interesting to me, he hasn't fired a single person at the state police, where there are a number of troopers who've been investigated and others who've been, people who oversaw this, who've been able to retire and run off into the sunset with their taxpayer-funded pension. When are you going to fire someone at the state police, Governor?
Well, let me start by saying, first of all, that many members of his own party, my opponent's own party, called his accusations and demands with respect to the state police political nonsense. 48 troopers have been referred by the current colonel and her leadership team to the Attorney General and to the U.S. Attorney for investigation. 48. Every single indictment, every single plea deal, those are people who our administration and the colonel actually submitted to law enforcement to review and determine if they committed a crime. I think the thing is outrageous. I'm glad we blew up Troop E, which is where the vast majority of this was going on. And by the way, this has been going on for a long time. There's documentation and public records that show that this was going back before our administration even began. We discovered it, we pursued it, and we ended it. And I think that's exactly the way we should have performed.
Go ahead, Mr. Gonzalez.
Governor Baker's been governor for 4 years, and this has been happening on his watch. And he just hired, 19 months after the first incident was reported, just hired someone to take a look at the payroll and personnel practices at the state police. It's unacceptable. And there are a lot of people who I've been talking to who are very frustrated about what's happening there. This kind of thing impacts people's perception of government, which is dangerous when government loses credibility with people, because government is a positive force in people's lives. It is the vehicle through which we empower each other and support each other and protect each other. And we need to maintain the public's trust. And Governor Baker with the state police has lost it and has taken way too long to get a handle on what's going on there. I would fire the colonel, and I would put someone in place who wasn't an insider and who would come in from the outside and have credibility to clean up the problems at the state police.
Go ahead.
Look, the colonel did the investigation. She led the investigation. She's the one that gave the data to the U.S. Attorney and to the Attorney General that they could then use to prosecute the violators and pursue their behavior. I think the colonel's doing the right thing. She put GPS devices in all the cruisers. She set up a quarterly audit for all overtime work. You have to go face-to-face now at both the beginning and the end of your shift. She brought in E&Y to do a full review of the accounting and financial and administrative practices of the department. And the final thing I'll say here, because it's important, you know, that first string they started to pull 19 months ago that my opponent talked about, they actually had to do the work associated with determining where that went before they could actually submit the documentation to the Attorney General and to the U.S. Attorney. And they wanted to make sure they got it right. Well, guess what? They did. And that's why people are pleading out now and why the U.S. Attorney is issuing arrest warrants for these guys. And they should.
Equal time, sir.
19 months since that first report. And it was a lot of media reports of other problems that ended up kicking the Baker administration into action on this. It's not good enough. You can't make your whole case for being governor that you're going to be a great manager and then oversee an agency that got multiple people who've been indicted, taking way too long to get a handle on it, aside from other problems at the environmental police, which we've been reading about, and a number of other agencies. I am going to clean up and take charge on these management practices and fix management. But the big difference between us is managing well isn't good enough for me. I'm going to aim high and take on some of the big challenges we face and make sure we make a difference for working families across this state.
And on that note, gentlemen, our time is up. Thank you, Governor Baker, Mr. Gonzalez. We appreciate it. And thank you for watching. Just one important reminder before we say goodnight. If you are not registered to vote, please note that the deadline to do so is Wednesday, October 17th. Voting day, of course, is November 6th, 4 weeks from today. So cast your ballot. Then watch it count on our special election night coverage on WBZ and MyTV 38. And please join us for the U.S. Senate debate at 8 o'clock on Friday, October 19th, here on MyTV 38. For all of us here at WBZ, thank you for watching.
With Election Day less than a month away and the control of Congress in question, see the